Hello. So today I am back with another video, and as usual, I have run out of topics to talk about, and so today I'm just going to be ranting about the Battle of Teutoberg Forest for as long as I can. Um, Actually, that's not true. I could talk about the Battle of Teutoberg Forest for hours on end, but for now, I'll try to control myself. So, the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, just for context, is one of the most important battles in world history. I think a lot of people will agree. It's not that well known in the general public. There was a Netflix series about it called Barbarians, and there are a lot of old operas about it, but they're not that well known today, right? So this used to be a very big deal in European history. So it used to be true that almost everybody in Europe kind of knew about this battle and its significance, and maybe that's kind of true today. But I think after basically after the 19th century, I think a lot of people just stopped caring, and so it's a very weird kind of topic to kind of bring up today, as you'll probably be feeling right now. But okay, uh, the Battle of Teutoburg Forest was in 9 AD, right? The year 9 AD, and it was between the Roman Empire and the Germanic tribes in basically what is now modern day Germany. Um, and the okay, spoiler alert: the Germanic tribes won, right? The Germanic tribes won, and this is a massive event in world history because the Roman Empire had not really been defeated by a bunch of barbarians at this point, and so this was a very big kind of turning point for what people even thought of the Germanic tribes and like what the Germans even thought of themselves. And so why do I bring this up suddenly? So two pieces of context. Number one, I took Latin in high school as a second language, and that kind of comes along with a curriculum of Roman history. And so you learn about this battle a lot if you take Latin. And also, I just have a coworker from Germany who recently flew in, and so those two things combined, the Latin background and the German coworker, kind of fused together to make me think of the Battle of Teutoburg Forest as the topic for this video. So let's get into it. Um, okay, so 9 AD. Let's kind of set the scene here. So, the leader of the Roman Empire at this time is this guy named Augustus, right? Emperor Augustus. He is the first emperor of the Roman Empire, right? So before this, Rome had been a republic, meaning that you had elected officials. But then everybody knows Julius Caesar, right? So Julius Caesar kind of proclaimed himself dictator for life, and then he is killed, and there's a civil war afterwards, and his nephew, this guy named Octavian, wins the civil war and proclaims himself Emperor Augustus, right? Emperor Augustus. And so this is really very early imperial Rome, and it's really just the start of Rome's golden age, or the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace, right? So this is really Rome at its height. This is Rome where this is the Rome that you've seen in Hollywood movies. It is massively expanding. They have massive legions. They're by far the most powerful force on earth. Um, and so this is why part of why it's such a shock to them that they lose this battle. Um, cool. Okay, so that is basically the world situation or the situation in Europe at the time. And so let's meet a few more of the characters. So there's obviously the Roman general at the charge of this battle. So the Roman general um, of this legion is this guy named Varus, or Varus in Latin. So by the way, in Latin, the letter V is pronounced like the English letter W, right? So Varus or Verus, Varus is Varus or Varus in Latin. But I'll be calling him Varus for the rest of this video. So Varus is the Roman general in charge of the legions. Um, and on the German side, the commander is this guy named Arminius, right? So you might have noticed that it's a very Latin sounding name, Arminius, because it comes from Latin records, right? So again, all records of this battle come from Rome because the Germanic tribes didn't really have a written culture at this time. So anyway, um, Arminius is the leader of the Germanic tribes. And Arminius kind of has his own very special story. A lot of it is kind of mixed with myth because again, since this battle is so important to the German identity, right? Because this is the kind of the major battle where they defeated Roman expansion, and the Germans used to be kind of very proud of this fact. Arminius was almost considered the national founder of Germany for many many centuries, or at least one of the very kind of central figures in defining German identity in the very early years, right? So this is 9 AD. This is way before Germany even existed as a country. But the early German identity was largely kind of formed around this battle. And so Handel, the famous German composer, has a famous opera about Arminius called Arminio, in which he very much romanticizes the life story of Arminius. He gives him a wife named Dusnelda, and it's a kind of very classic like German opera around around the 19th century, I want to say. Actually, let's check that because I don't want to be wrong. Uh, Arminio opera. Oh, yeah, 18th century, 1736. But yes. Cool. Okay, so that is. Oh, by the way, okay. So yes, Arminius. So Arminius, by the way, his name, um, again, it has been Latinized, so we don't really know what his actual German name was. Most people think it was something like Hermann, right, or Hermann, or the old Germanic equivalent of that, because again, Arminius was obviously not his actual name because it's a very Latin sounding name and ends in US, anything like that. But Hermann is a very kind of common Germanic name, and it's very likely that Hermann was Latinized into Arminius, right? So Hermann Arminius. Um, so, but we'll be calling him Arminius because, again, even that theory is not quite confirmed by most scholars. Um, Cool. Okay. So Arminius used to work as a Roman soldier, or used to serve as a Roman soldier in the Roman army, which again was not very uncommon at the time. It was a pretty normal thing for the Roman army to recruit Germanic warriors and soldiers to fight against usually other Germanic warriors and soldiers, right? So again, we call them Germanic or German today, right? Like all these tribes that were in modern day Germany, but they didn't really have a modern German identity, and it wasn't really a country, right? And so it was just a bunch of like tribes, and they didn't really have any shared sense of like, oh, we are the Germanic peoples and we all hate the Romans, right? Because that wasn't really true. A lot of Germanic tribes were allied with the Romans. They had very beneficial relationships with the Romans, and they often kind of imported Roman customs in exchange for basically being mercenaries for hire, right? Because the Roman army was always running out of soldiers, and so if they could hire like Germanic soldiers to fight against other Germanic soldiers, then that was kind of a win-win situation. And so Arminius was one of those people. And so, even though he was a very important person in his kind of own Germanic tribe, he worked in the Roman army. He served as a soldier in the Roman army, and this is probably where he first learned a lot of the kind of the Roman ways of war and like the customs that later enabled him to defeat the Roman army at the Battle of Teutoberg Forest. So Arminius, not that much is known about him, but again, so much mythos has been built around this figure, and there's a very famous statue of him in Germany. Um, but anyway, there's a very so much mythos has been kind of built around this figure that it's kind of difficult to tell apart fact from fiction. But we do know that he was in the Roman army, and that he was kind of the leader of his tribe, in modern day Germany. And so the actual battle, I won't go into the details of the actual battle because number one, I don't think it's that interesting or that important. But I think you, you can almost think of it like Vietnam, the Vietnam War, which is a weird comparison. But again, it's a forest, right? The Battle of Teutoburg Forest, and so it like the Germans knew like the land, like their own land, extremely well, but the Romans really didn't, and so they were ambushed a lot in this area, and essentially it was kind of a there was a very large information gap between what the Romans knew about the terrain and like the land around this area versus what the actual Germanic tribes knew. And so one could argue that the Romans simply kind of overshot their boundaries a little bit too much. And so this kind of advantage enabled the Germanic tribes to launch this giant ambush and claim this massive victory. And the Roman legions in this battle were just utterly destroyed, right? They almost all died. And so in Roman history, this battle is not called the Battle of Teutoberg Forest. It's usually called the Varian disaster, right? After the commander Varus. So Varus is kind of known for his like most crushing defeat, which I don't think is fair to Varus, but uh, that's how most of the history is recorded. Um, and legend has it that when the Emperor Augustus of Rome heard about the defeat, he kind of shook his fist at the sky and shouted, "Varus, where are my legions? Right? Where are my legions?" Because he was so uh, worked up about the fact that he thought that he commanded the most powerful, the most invincible Roman army, the most powerful, the most invincible army in the world, which was the Roman army, um, and yet he had kind of he had to mentally deal with the fact that he had just been defeated by a bunch of really squabbling tribes that had really no even central organization, and that was a very big kind of uh, moment in both the Roman morale at the time and also the German morale at the time, right? Because it kind of showed the world and that the Roman army was not invincible and actually could be stopped. So this is really the point where the Augustan period of expansion ends. After this point, there is not really a lot of kind of major expansion for many years. And the Romans never conquer all of Germany, right? They conquer the southern half of Germany, called Germania Inferior, right? So inferior does not mean worse. Inferior just means below. But they never conquer all of Germany. And so I think that's a good transition towards talking about the impact of this battle. So again, the biggest impact of this battle was that Germany was not conquered by the Romans and would never be conquered by the Romans, which is a very big deal. So if you think of, let's say, other countries like France or Spain or even Britain to some extent that were conquered by the Romans, or Britain was briefly conquered by the Romans, they left a lot of kind of cultural influence in a way that Germany and a lot of Northern Europe kind of escaped. So, for example, Germany does not speak a Romance language, right? So German, they speak German, which is a Germanic language, of course, and has actually very little in common with the Romance languages, right? So if you ever try to learn the German language or any of these other languages, you'll know how different of a language German is, and the large kind of Germanic family as a whole. And also culturally, you could argue that a lot of the kind of the Romanizing influences were kind of stopped at that point. And so this is very hard to compare because, again, we don't have an alternate history where France was never conquered by the Romans or something like that. But you can very clearly see that countries like France, like Spain, like Italy, all those Mediterranean countries have such a long Roman history that's very difficult to kind of separate that history with kind of the modern state of both their cultural and linguistic heritage today, right? So French and Spanish are both Romance languages. They both directly evolved from Latin, right? And so a lot of the grammatical structures are very similar. And even when other non-Romans conquered France and Spain, they would often kind of fuse with the local Roman customs, and so which is why again we call them Romance languages because they basically all evolved from the exact same source, whereas German and a lot of other strains like that evolved from a very different source. And even culturally, right? So one could argue that modern Southern Europe is extremely different from modern Northern Europe. And if the Battle of Teutoberg Forest had gone the other way, then maybe that wouldn't be true, right? Maybe that wouldn't be or as true. Right, so modern Southern Europe is predominantly Catholic. It is a predominantly kind of family-based society, and is generally more kind of collectivistic in a lot of ways, as compared to Northern Europe, which is a lot more Protestant, which is a lot more kind of individualistic, and has a lot of kind of cultural kind of markers that make it very, very distinct from the kind of the Mediterranean world. And if Rome had conquered all of Germany at this time, and right, maybe they would have gone further. Maybe they would have conquered, Denmark, maybe even Scandinavia, right? Because the Romans were not known to just stop when they were satisfied, and so they would have, and so there's a good chance that they would have steamrolled through all of kind of Northern Europe, and a lot of the kind of the Romanization that happened in Southern Europe would have permeated towards the rest of Europe as well. Um, what else is it? Oh, yeah, I mentioned the World Wars, and I think this is also a big part of it. The distinct uh, kind of the German nationalism that happened at the that kind of rose up at the end of the 18th and 19th centuries, really, was in large part very based on this idea that they were the ones that who defeated the Romans, and so Arminius became a very kind of venerated figure at around this time. Around this time, and a lot of the perceived kind of cultural differences between Germany and France and England at the time were are a direct result of the kind of the different cultural heritages that kind of came about as a result of this battle. And so one could argue that maybe if the Romans had conquered Germany, yes, maybe some form of a world war would have happened, but nowhere near the kind of the sheer amount of kind of cultural dissonance that the Germans and the French felt towards one another, and also not nearly the amount of kind of German nationalism that kind of all came about because of the sense that we are the ones who resisted. We are the ones who kind of are able to be a little bit outside the mainstream of Europe, but want to kind of break out. And so there's a very good chance that, for example, Germany would have been a country much earlier, right? So the reason that France, or arguably the reason that France was able to be a unified country so early is because the Romans had basically made a kind of very civilized system of kind of provincial governance and laid it out as Gallia, or Gaul at the time, right? So the later leaders of France were able to inherit this and basically say, okay, now we have this province and we now call it France. But Germany never had that because they were never conquered by the Romans. But if they did, then it's right. If they did, then it's very possible that Germany as a country, which didn't come about until around 150 years ago, but there's a chance that Germany would have become a country much, much earlier, and they wouldn't have had the kind of the later need to break out into the world stage like they did, or they attempted to do during the world wars, because they would have already been a country, right? France and England and Spain and all these countries, in a way, had a big advantage because they had already kind of been formed as nations by Roman rule, and so they were later able to kind of go out and have colonies and have all these big empires very early. But Germany kind of got a late start to that because first they had to build Germany, right? First they had to build Germany into a whole, and then when they wanted to kind of go out and build their own empires, they found that a lot of the empires had already been taken in a sense by France and England and Spain, and so a lot of kind of the world wars were an attempt to assert their own German sphere of influence. But again, if the Battle of Teutoberg Forest had gone the other way, then maybe Germany would have been formed as a country much earlier. They would have gone out and gotten colonies a lot earlier, and they wouldn't have felt the need to start all those wars. Um, but yeah, this is a very kind of uh, very big kind of detour on the topic. But again, the whole point of this is just to say that you should care about the Battle of Teutoburg Forest. It is a very, very important battle. Everybody used to know about it, but now it's kind of has been kind of faded into obscurity, except for the kind of the most fanatical amateur historians like myself. Cool. Okay, so it's almost 20 minutes. Okay, I think we've talked enough about this battle. Again, I could talk more about this battle if I really wanted to, but I don't want to bore you. And so, I think that's counts as a success in finding a topic for today's video. So I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, see ya.